Hi, everyone, and welcome to this wealthmanagement.com Fast Chat. I'm Shannon Rossick, and today I'm excited to be joined by Mark Beshany, Managing Director and Market Leader for the Florida Gulf Coast market, Wells Fargo. Mark brings a wealth of experience and insights to the table with a deep understanding of the evolving wealth management landscape and a laser focus on helping advisors thrive. In this conversation, we'll explore Mark's journey in the industry, the resources and strategy Wells Fargo Advisors is leveraging to serve both clients and advisors, and how they're uniquely positioned to meet the demands of today's market, especially in the Florida Gulf Coast region. Plus, we'll dive into Mark's belief in the three critical pillars of wealth management that every advisor needs to excel at. So with that, let's get started. Mark, thanks so much for joining me.
Well, Shannon, it's an honor to be here with you. It's really a lot of fun to be able to share kind of an insider's perspective of who Wells Fargo Advisors is and how we serve our clients and advisors.
And you've been with Wells Fargo for over 30 years. Can you tell us about your journey and the changes you've seen over that time?
Yeah, absolutely. January will be my 34th anniversary with the firm. Sometimes hard to believe when I think about it, but it's been a remarkable journey. You know, from a personal standpoint, I spent the first 10 years of my life on the capital markets side, both as an investment banker and running the asset management company of one of our predecessors. But the last probably 5 years of my journey here at Wells Fargo Advisors has been truly extraordinary. I think we've seen the greatest amount of change in the way we operate our organization. And truthfully, Shannon, I think it's really about how we're laser focused, kind of like you talked about, in what do we do in serving our advisors and how do we help our advisors serve their clients? So I'd say there's probably a few key changes that I think have been truly extraordinary. One, we made a very key distinction in the run of our organization in making sure that we understood who owns that client relationship. And so one of the big changes, Shannon, we made was we said there's really two kinds of roles in the firm: those who serve clients and those who serve clients. And I know that's a little confusing, but it really helped make the distinction that if you are a financial advisor in this organization, you own that client relationship. So that was probably one of the biggest major changes we made over the last 5 years. As I think about it, I think another big piece of it was technology. I think we did a great job of making sure that the client experience, whether it was online through a website or through their mobile app or their iPad, was best in class. But we need to go back and we needed to rebuild the infrastructure behind the scenes. And so we recently launched our new Advisor Gateway platform, state-of-the-art technology, works a lot like your iPhone, but I think that was a major piece of our experience and our transformation. I think that part of that also, Shannon, was recognizing that we're not a technology company, we're a financial services company. And when you think about that, that means that you don't homegrown your technology. If there is a solution that is best in class, then let's deploy that solution. So for example, contact management sits on Salesforce. We use Quotes and Monitor through FactSet. So those big changes, I think, in the way that we operate the business has been truly profound, especially in the last 5 years or so.
So I want to dig into this concept of, you mentioned investment in best-in-class experiences. And you said, while you're obviously not a software company, can you talk about what that process has looked like and how it ultimately benefits advisors?
Yeah, I think a lot of it started about 10 years ago in research. So our research group, Wells Fargo Investment Institute, WFII, but it took a big change. Again, over the last 30 years, I remember times that you had analysts in different divisions of the company, and sometimes I think you might got on the news and see them actually talking against each other. But we brought into unification a single research arm that brought all the resources together. So you didn't have one analyst contradicting another. Seems kind of simple, but really impactful when you think about how you serve the client. But we didn't stop there. We also made sure that the investment products that are driven by that research is also connected to Wells Fargo Investment Institute. We call it a center of excellence. So you don't have the risk of an analyst saying to you, hey, we should become more focused in equities, or hey, we should be throttling back in short-term debt, and then not have a solution to execute around it. And that was a big change. We also don't do proprietary solutions. Years ago, we sold off our asset management company to ensure that our research is unbiased and open in architecture, but also that the investment products that we deliver do much of the same. And I think that is a big change in the way an organization should operate. Like I said, we just celebrated our 10-year anniversary. And I have to be honest with you, I've never been more proud of the research product of Wells Fargo. In fact, we just announced our 2025 outlook, which is really amazing. But again, it allows an advisor to communicate with their client and provide solutions that fit that mold, whether it's asset allocation, tactical, strategic, or even in the alternative investment space. Because I got to tell you something, when you look at that research piece, that's a big part of, I think, what investors are looking for in today's world.
Absolutely. In 10 years, congratulations. And I mentioned it in my intro, but you are focused on the Florida Gulf Coast area, and it shows because you're absolutely glowing. And for somebody with a 30-year career, I think you're aging backwards, so you might be Benjamin Button. But tell us a little bit about the unique positioning Wells Fargo Advisors has in that region as it pertains to resources present in the area.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, my beginnings of my career at Wells Fargo was really with a regional concern. And if you really look at the history of Wells Fargo, we were always a series of regional investment firms that have sort of come together. And sometimes I tell people, yeah, we're still a regional firm, and they laugh at me, right? You certainly can't be at the size, scope, and scale of Wells Fargo and call yourself a regional concern. But I think the culture feels like a regional firm. And, Shannon, you're right. On the Florida Gulf Coast, we have all of the resources of wealth and investment management, boots on the ground, spanning from Tampa to Sarasota to Naples. And I think that's probably where I think about it from the standpoint that I have the ability to out-local the national companies and out-national the locals, right? Because I'll have the ability to have folks boots on the ground to support the client needs. But at the same time, we do so at a local level. So in my leadership role, yes, I'm focused on how we continue to grow, but I also am responsible for the operations, the administration, the compliance, the marketing, real estate. That's, I think, been my biggest sort of observation over the last number of years, is the idea that somebody's going to come from New York or Charlotte or St. Louis and tell you, hey, let us tell you how you should do your real estate. No, when your boots on the ground, you know what's right in your community and you know how those communities operate. So I think that's been a profound impact in the way we operate our business, much different than I think a lot of our competitors who like to do that from a more centralized operating model. So again, I think that's where we get the real strength of out-localing the nationals and out-nationaling the locals.
I love that saying. And I know one of your cornerstone beliefs is that there are 3 things you must be able to do well in wealth management. So if you wouldn't mind sharing with us what those are and how Wells Fargo advisors support advisors with each of those.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think when I watch, and I'm very much a student of the industry, I guess, you spend so much time in it, you really should be. But I think about the wealth business and I think about wealth management. And I think that's one of those terms that gets tossed around quite a bit, Shannon. I think, as you point out, there's really 3 things that you have to be able to do to serve clients in the wealth arena. One, you have to be able to manage assets. And again, I think that's somewhat table stakes. I do think that most institutions usually have a strong asset management platform, but it's got to really fulfill client needs across a very broad spectrum. Because again, we don't have a one-size-fits-all model. So in the end, I've got to be able to provide the basics of great asset management. Maybe that's third-party separately managed accounts, mutual funds, UITs, annuities. And so we have to have a platform that is unbiased in making sure that we have best-in-class providers. I think you also have to be able to serve the more advanced client needs. And so that comes in the space of alternative investments, often referred to as AI. I think structured product or market-linked investments becomes another big piece of that. So again, I think the first cornerstone is asset management. And again, not commoditized, but specialized for the client need and moves up market as the client moves up market. The second is I think you have to be able to manage the whole client. You've got to be able to manage the debt side of the client balance sheet. And I think this is where you start to see a bit of a disparate experience in wealth management, because clients today often use lending and borrowing as leverage to continue to grow their wealth. And I think that's a big part of it. And so having a bank as part of your platform, having access to a balance sheet, whether you're serving the individual client, the institution, the commercial client, is critical to the wealth management experience. And so I often struggle when I talk to folks and I go, oh, I could do the asset management, but then I'm like, well, how do you serve that whole client on a full balance sheet basis? So I think having access to the bank infrastructure, I think, is that second leg of the stool. The third leg, I must tell you, I think is the most critical. And that is the ability to work with clients through the transition of wealth through trust and planning. And I have to tell you, Shannon, that's the holy grail, because we have a robust trust platform that's capable of serving really any client need. And I know that's a little brash to say, but I believe at its core, we exist in a business model where a client cannot outgrow Wells Fargo. And by the way, I also believe that the advisor can't outgrow Wells Fargo, but we'll come back to that in a minute. I think when you look at trust and planning, you are in the most critical part of the client experience, because as clients move up market in wealth, they deal with that ultimate reality of the passing of a patriarch or matriarch. And if you can't serve them in that place, I think you struggle. And even more difficult is if you have to outsource that. I don't know how that really helps the client experience. So those are, I think, the three key pillars of that experience. Strong asset management platform, capabilities of lending when a client needs to leverage that opportunity, and most importantly, be able to manage the transition of their wealth through trust and planning.
Well, that is certainly a sturdy stool. And I do appreciate you calling out that it's not commoditized and much more custom. I think that's a very important distinction to make. But I have to ask, if advisors in your region are considering maybe making a move, what should they be thinking about as they evaluate firms?
Well, I think we hit on the key area, which is, do you have the platform to serve the client? And do you run the risk of your client outgrowing your capabilities, right? So I think that is very critical as you look at that experience. I think the other part of it is you've got to make sure that you yourself don't outgrow the firm that you're at. And so as you look at today's environment, and I think you have to be very candid and honest about it, there isn't a one-size-fits-all model for which an advisor could affiliate with a firm like Wells Fargo. So when you think about our firm, we offer, in the traditional sense of the word, bank brokerage. We offer private client. We offer private wealth, but we also offer independence. And as I look at today's landscape and you think about where advisors grow, right? So we talked about the client experience, Shannon, where the client runs the risk of outgrowing the firm because their wealth becomes so significant. Advisors run the risk of outgrowing their firm when a firm doesn't embrace the idea of the client and advisor relationship. I think all too often that relationship is sacred. And so if an advisor says, well, I think for my career and for my career path, being a business owner and being independent is very important to me, well, then you have to be able to move that direction. And again, maybe even further down the line, going into a pure RIA model might be the path for that advisor. But what's critical here is that as the advisor's life and career evolve, the client shouldn't be disenfranchised. So pridefully, when a client becomes a client of Wells Fargo, regardless of the door they walk through, they're assigned an account number. They do their paperwork. That client experience stays regardless of how that advisor's life transitions. So as we talk about the Florida Gulf Coast, if you come into Tampa in our private client group, but then 10 years later, you decide to set up your own independent practice in Naples, Florida, the client shouldn't be disenfranchised. And in our model, we make sure that that client experience doesn't change. So their account numbers don't change, all the links to their plans don't change, and most importantly, the experience continues simply with the advisor that they've chosen. And I think that is the most important thing, because you never want to be in a position where either your client outgrows the firm you're currently at, or you outgrow the firm you're at. And so that's where I think we make that key differentiating factor that I don't know that many can compete with us in that space.
No, that's a great point. And like you said, it's all about the relationships at the end of the day. That's what wealth management is all about. So just before we wrap here, Mark, any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
I would, yeah, I think there's one that I would encourage people to look at. And I realized this, I laugh at myself. So, before I got into the industry, I actually served in the Marine Corps. I was an enlisted Marine, but that was my Marine Corps, college, and Wells Fargo. So here's my whole life in three easy steps. But what I've come to realize is sometimes you need that insider's perspective. Today I coach a lot of veterans, either considering service or coming out of service into the private sector. And I realize that what I'm often doing is I'm giving them that insider's preview or insider's perspective of what it's like within these different frameworks. I would encourage your listeners, your viewers here today, to sit down with somebody like myself and get that insider's view of what goes on at Wells Fargo. Because I think what often happens is when I sit down with especially very large, significant practices, and we start to go through the capabilities of our wealth platform or the optionality of how you may choose to affiliate with us, I often get, I had no idea. And so that's how I'd leave you with it, Shannon, is sit down with somebody like myself and let us give you that insider's preview, and we'll share with you what we're so prideful about.
Great advice. And thank you for your service, both on the military side and in wealth management. Mark, your insights have just been incredible. And thank you so much for sharing in your time today.
No, it's been an honor and a pleasure. And again, I'm so excited to be able to share my company with you and certainly with your viewers.